Okay. So I'm here with Patrick Regan of XLP. Can you tell me a little bit about what XLP is, and a bit about your new book, No Celing to Hope?
Yeah, XLP is a youth and community project that's really passionate about communicating and demonstrating the love of God across many of our inner city areas. So started 15 years ago. I was a youth worker in a local church. There was a stabbing in the school down the road from the church, and the school phoned the church up and said, can you help us get the moral fibre of our school up? Vicar didn't really fancy it, knew how rough the school was, so sent me as the local youth worker to see what I could do. And I arrived in really just saying, as local church, we believe in serving our local community. What can we do to serve? What can we do to help? And so we started helping with literacy. This school had 65 mother tongue languages in it. So we started helping in that area, started helping in issues around conflict resolution. And to cut a really long story short, I think my heart was just broken for the inner city and some of the stuff that I was seeing going on in the inner city. And so we started working in schools, we started working and living on estates, we started running mentoring projects, arts projects, to really have this wraparound approach, which was very holistic, to say that we want to see change, particularly with people that everyone else has written off. And I think the whole vision for No Celing To Hope goes alongside that really. So often I think we look at massive issues in our world, whether that's issues of addiction or homelessness, poverty, even politics, we say there's no hope for those type of things. But the whole thing about No Celing To Hope is actually when you partner with God and you get His perspective, change is always possible, and that's what we need to believe in.
Yeah. So I understand there's part of your book there's you mentioned compassion and your involvement with compassion. So we're here in your office in Lewisham, in a suburb of London. How does that relate to your passion for what the work of compassion is?
Compassion, I went to Bolivia in 2007, and Bolivia is one of South America's poorest countries, and we were visiting various compassion projects, just seeing some of the incredible work that they do. And I think what really spoke to me about it was a number of things. One was the passion of the workers, that they'd obviously been there years and years and years, and yet when they were faced with poverty and hardship, they didn't harden up. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They were soft, tender-hearted people. Second thing was around the holistic nature of what compassion is all about, which is very similar to what I've been describing about XLP, that it was about the spiritual, physical, mental, emotional well-being of a child. And you saw these children going into the projects and being transformed, and not just them transformed, but their family transformed as well. And that really spoke to me. So whenever I can big up the work of compassion, I do. And I think it's important that as Christians that we don't just stay in our own little sort of ghetto, as it were. But if you read the Gospels, Jesus is passionate about poverty and passionate about confronting injustice, much more than most of the subjects that we get hung up on in the church sometimes. And so I just think that what we need to do is really make sure that we invest in things that are long term and bring about transformation. And compassion is definitely one of those.
Yeah. So how do you think hope is relevant to the people that you're serving here in the suburbs of London, and also people in kind of distant, remote areas of Kenya or Africa?
I think hope is that calls into question your present reality. And I think what happens is that if you believe change is possible, you end up being a very different type of person. You start living with hope and purpose, and you can see the change. And it's interesting, we had this conversation with clinical psychologists and the police and people that deal with sexual violence within the police. And one of the key things they were saying to us is if you want to see change in a person, they need three things. One is they need an ability to trust people. Because actually the reality is, in our very individualistic society here, we struggle to trust people. We don't trust institutions. And it's the same across the world. If you want to change, you've got to trust that person. And again, in areas of poverty, you know that the dad has often got an addiction. The mum is struggling for all sorts of reasons, and trust does start to break down, even though in some of those countries the community is far better than we are over here at coming together. But secondly, they said, if to see change happen, the person has got to believe that hope is possible, that they've got to have that belief in themselves. themselves and in the situation around them. Otherwise, if you don't have hope, you just embrace things that will eventually destroy you. And I've seen that across the world. You know, I've seen mums prostituting themselves because they've got nothing left to sell to get money for their kids. They're living without hope. And when someone journeys alongside them and says, you know what, change is possible, and I'm not just going to tell you it, I'm going to actually be involved in your life as well. And then thirdly, the thing is if you trust someone, you've got belief that things can change, you probably need to realise that you need to change in that process. So there's a recognition of your attitudes and your behaviours need to change. And when you get those three things working together, you start to see real change. You know, we've had kids who come here, for instance, who were told by their teacher, you end up in prison or in a dead-end job, involved in all sorts of stuff going on in the community, which wasn't great stuff. This particular guy actually got 3 A's in his A-levels, and now is employed here on staff. As change as possible. Just recently we had a kid who we've been mentoring who was self-harming, and really chaotic family situation. We got a mentor for her, started to address some of the issues, and she's even now got to a place where she can talk about it, and she's set up a little self-harm help group in her school for the other girls that are struggling with it as well, and they write love on their arm now, instead of being a place where they want to destroy themselves. So it is tough, it is hard, but hope is always possible. I always say to people, if you look down outside and you're walking along, you see these grey, lifeless concrete slabs, but if you look more closely, wherever there's a little gap, there's this grass growing out, you know, and you can bend down, you can pick it up, and but you won't take away its root. And I think the thing what compassion does, and hopefully XLP does as well, is you look at some of the really depressing things in this world, issues of poverty, issues of fatherlessness and addiction, and you don't ignore them, because that's reality for so many people's lives. But what you also look at is the bit of life that's growing, and you think, okay, let's get behind that and let it grow, because if it grows eventually, it's left alone, it'll crack the concrete. And so I think it's about what perspective that you want to take on some of these things.
Yeah, so I guess you could add a fourth to your list of 3 there, in the person who's reaching out to help needs to hope that the situation can change as well, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Though I've been in situations where I've been reaching out and thinking, oh my goodness, what on earth is good is this going to do? And God's always surprised me. So I guess that is important, but I think it's more important about how you work with people. So the thing is, you know, there's this verse in Timothy that says, preach the gospel in season and out of season. And I think that we're called to be those people that whether you're seeing, you know, huge successes, or whether actually it looks like nothing's happening and you're feeling really down on yourself and you're thinking, what good is this money actually doing, or what good is me being involved in here? Its reality is that, you know, the kingdom of God is described as a mustard seed. It's like small, sometimes insignificant acts of love and compassion, but they change the world. But you don't always see it. And I see a lot of people get really depressed at that point and give up, you know. But the reality is the people that really make a difference are the people that push through and keep going. You know, everyone sort of says to me, what's the secret of 15 years in the inner city, XLP? And the reality is, I mean, I'm sure we've got some amazing staff, we've got some very passionate people who are very skilled at what they're doing, but the reality is, just like the compassion workers in many of these countries that I've met, they just keep going because their love and their motivation comes from a different place. That's why actually faith-based projects should be some of the best run projects in the whole of the world. And I'm sure that they